Hi there, I'm Angela Blacklaw, and I'm going to be doing a 10-minute video on archetypes and the monomyth. Now, working at home is all very strange. I'm not even working at home, I'm working at my parents' house. So if my mum wanders past, just wave at her and we'll just keep going. So what I'd like you to do before we have Q&A sessions on Thursday is to work through the materials and have a feel for what we're doing here. Materials fall into, I think, three categories. We have got, first of all, a presentation. Now, if we were together for the whole 2 hours, we'd be working through the contents of that presentation together. Just to give you the top line of what it is, first of all. So the objectives of what we'd be exploring is really grasping the concept of applying Jung's archetypes to songwriting. Now, why do it? Because in my experience, there's a richness to doing that. There's a deep sense of authenticity. And if nothing else, it's a creativity technique. Those times when you feel a bit stuck, what can I do? Well, you've got 12 different ways of getting into another song here. There's something very interesting also perhaps about the connection between these archetypes and your artist voice, your artist identity as well. So in these materials, we're going to explore 12 of those archetypes, which are based on the work of Carol Pearson. Carol Pearson did some great personal development work, but ultimately it's based on the findings of Jung, who did a huge amount of research across the globe and found that time and again these blueprints, these archetypes, these constituents of what it is to be human popped up again and again all over the world. We will also briefly at the end explore the concept of the monomyth, the hero's journey, which is based on the work of Joseph Campbell. So, why Jung's archetypes? Well, back in 2014, when I was finishing off my undergraduate studies at ICMP in songwriting, this was the focus of my songwriting dissertation. I did some action research with about 20 volunteer songwriters. And my research question was whether or not we could use Jung's archetypes to create songs and so on. And the answer is yes. We got some great feedback from that. My research was published in University of East London Research and Teacher Education, May 2018. And I'll pop that article in the resources as well. So these archetypes are, Jung called them forms or images of a collective nature which occur practically all over the world, both in myth and also in conscious origin. They're used quite a lot consciously in advertising. I promise after this you will never look at advertising the same way again. And they've also been used consciously in some classic films, things like Star Wars and so on. And that any archetype is not in itself good or bad, it simply is. But they all have light and shade as part of them. So what I'm going to ask you to do is work through the contents of the presentation, looking at each of these 12 archetypes. The innocent, which is all about faith and optimism and possibly denial. The orphan, which is kind of dignity after loss, understanding pain, and how that reaches everybody. There's a sort of equality, an ordinariness to the orphan. The warrior, which is about fighting, perhaps a principled fight, perhaps less so, but it's about strength and boundaries and so on. Caregiver, which is looking after, nurturing, something that obviously we're seeing a great deal of at the moment. The seeker, which is exploring and trying to find new opportunities, new horizons. The lover, which is about connecting, passion, commitment, possibly even stalking. The destroyer, which is about letting go of what doesn't serve us anymore, accepting that things die and stop and change. The creator, because there's something that's worth doing, it is worth doing beautifully. So ultimately to make beautiful, useful things, and that includes ourselves and our lives. The ruler, this is all about tangible power, being in charge, being at the top of the tree. We've got the magician. Magician is about intangible power, transformation, charisma, rainmakers, shamans. The sage doesn't need to control anything. The sage just needs to understand it. So it's about wisdom and seeking truth and knowledge. And lastly, the jester. The jester is all about just being in the moment, living life, enjoying life, being joyful for its own sake. There's a little bit of data that we would have talked through as well on how to use them creatively. Including my own album, The Scale of Love and Destruction, which is very much based on two key archetypes, love, the lover and the destroyer, and the kind of sliding scale from one to the other. We can also talk perhaps a little bit more at Q&A about the notion of the monomyth. The monomyth, the hero's journey, has been, I think it was James Joyce who first coined the term, but Joseph Campbell really ran with it. And it's this notion that frequently in our lives, we are called into a journey. We face something complex, difficult, dark, dangerous. We almost die to ourselves and are reborn. We are deeply transformed by that. And then we basically come back with the fruits of our labour. So that the rest of the world can benefit from what it is we have learnt. And we see this time and again. We see this in A Christmas Carol. We see it in Die Hard. We see it in The Hunger Games. We see it in Lord of the Rings. And we interestingly see it in the work of Wk10, who did a most stunning album about his sister's death and how that transformed him. So there's plenty to get your teeth into. So I recommend doing a couple of things. I recommend working through the presentation that I've put together, but in conjunction with the playlists. I have got 12 playlists, enough to keep you busy. Feel free to skip and dip through them, but it will give you a feel for the kind of music that I at least have identified under each of these 12 archetypes. There is also, if you have the appetite for it, a post-learning quiz. I'll post up there a little Word document so that with some sample lyrics, so that you can get a feel for the degree to which you've really absorbed this learning. And then what we can do on Thursday, if you come ready with your questions and your challenges and so on, we can have a Q&A session about this. I look forward to seeing you then.